Alright, so this little video is purely on Photoshop and doing tiled images. I covered this before, but I'll need to do it again and that sort of stuff. So in terms of setup for doing this sort of stuff, we're setting up for the web, so the resolution needs to be dropped down to 72 pixels per inch or PPI. The color mode really doesn't matter, whatever detail you want. Usually with tiled images, you want to go for a square. It makes it easier to work with and think through. And 500 by 500 is probably perfectly fine. Let's just so you can see the tiles on my screen when I do them. I'm going to drop it down to 300 by 300, but it really depends on what you're working with. So I've already got some CC0 paper textures that I've grabbed from I have no idea where, but if I use any of these as a background texture, it's really not going to work for me. So I'm just going to dump this in here and resize it so it fits the square. And hit OK. So you can see here it works. If I go File, Save As, and I'm just going to dump this on the desktop because that's all I need. Make it a background, make it a PNG, save, OK. And if I pull all this other stuff out of the way, so here I've got my background texture, and if I just go set as background, you can see, oh whoops, I should actually personalize it to make it work the right way. I'm going to just change it so it's a tile, and it will be hideously joined. You can see the cracks through there and where it lines up. So for this, we need to go actually doctor it and Photoshop it. So for the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just make a duplicate of the background. Okay, okay. And I'm going to lock this background layer so I can't modify it. Don't need those, I just need this one. So copy, paste, paste, paste. I've got now 4 copies, and I'm just going to use the move icon to reposition these things. Whoops, just auto select. I turned it off for another thing I'm working on. So what I've done is, because all these tiles join up in the center here, and that's a consistent texture across the top half to bottom half and all that sort of around there. By joining them this way, what I've just done is I can now focus on that join and make it as simple as possible. And there are a couple of tools that will enable you to do this. Now, because this is a destructive editing technique, it's always good to keep a backup, which I've done down the bottom here. And for this one, I actually need to merge those layers together. So what am I doing? First up, there are a couple of tools in at your disposal that you can do this with. The spot healing brush is the first of these. Holding down Alt, I can select yes, hold it, I can sample a paste, just don't, yeah, go away. And run this over that edge, and what it does is it mathematically works it out. It's not a perfect join, but this is really good for skin textures and making stuff consistent along that sort of line. And as you can see, it kind of does an okay job. It's not great. So we'll move on to the next one. The heal brush tool works the same as the other one, except what you'll notice is that there's tracking. So if I hold down this here, I can get the little crosshair on the top line, tracking to the bottom line. You can see that little graphical defect that occurred because that little crosshair started here, and when I went to here, it copied it across. This is great for extending lines on faces and extending terrain or whatever you want to do, to basically take something and repeat it again and again and again. So, but again, it mathematically blurs it, and that blurring is not always great, but hey, we'll move on to the next one. The next is a patch tool. This allows you to select a region and then go, I want that region to look like this, and it blends it all together mathematically. And if I then deselect it, you can see here, yeah, it's great. And I've just realized we've got the other keyboard shortcut icons on, but that's okay. So you've got the difference between this and the other is this is what I've selected and this is what I want it to look like, that kind of stuff. Then we move on to the clone stamp tool. This is probably my favorite because it's just easier. Just drop the brush size a little bit, hold down Alt. I will take a sample from over here, and all I'm doing is extending that image. Now, it's not going to blur together perfectly because it's taking a copy of one area and making it another. Careful around the edges, because you kind of want it to blend and sort of dab those edges together to so that you don't run over those edges to make a weird effect. So what I'm really doing is just sort of blending this together. Now if I go file save, oh, we're trying to save it as a PSD, we want it as a PNG, background PNG save, yes, okay, yes, and then we go set as desktop background, and it should please set as background. Give it a second. There we are. You can see a repeating pattern. It looks kind of messy. It's not a perfect job by any stretch of the imagination, but this is sort of a starting point anyway. So the trick is to try and get the best, cleanest seam across the edge. So usually when doing this sort of stuff, you work with a paper color that is fairly consistent. So just to do this one again and drop it on top, I would actually personally scale it up a fair bit so you've got a fairly consistent tone across the whole lot. And that may actually just work as it is looking at the edges. So if we just go file, save as, change it back to a PNG and select my background texture, yes, replace it, give it a few seconds, and then try again, set as background. That's not too bad, and then I can go into here and use that same blending technique to try and tidy it up. Now what I've just done is a quick little hatchet job. There's a lot better that you can do and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to stop here, and that's the tutorial.